I welcome people from Wilshire University and Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And this is the Wilshire University Film Society, where we are, I think it's our first joint, actually,
Right.
ongoing activity in the temple. So it's very exciting. And I am the director of adult programs, so I kind of oversee all of the adult culture, but we have a great specialist here, Jim Ruxin, who has been running the university synagogue film society for how many years?
3 years.
3 years. And Jim is, hold on, I'm going to look where I have it because I knew, but okay. So he is a career producer, director, and editor of films and television. And he right now teaches graduate students at USC Film School. So he's not just, an amateur. He's a professional. He's somebody who was really, I have to say, so dedicated to films, and he watches lots of films. He's very thoughtful. And we're so excited to have him be sort of our curator, our moderator for this film society, which will be at this time once a month on Wednesdays, and then probably twice at least on Saturday nights, which is when university has been doing it ongoing. And then we're going to move it to midweek once a month so that people who can't meet on the weekends can be at least, and you can watch all of them, even if you can't show up for the discussions. So with all of that, I want to welcome Jim and introduce Jim, who's going to talk a little bit, and then Fern Salka, who's going to explain sort of our protocol of how we're going to run the discussion. So I hand it over to Jim.
Thank you, Susan. I have to thank Rabbi Nanus, especially because she made me feel so welcome when we were planning the transition for the merger, to make sure that the University Synagogue Film Society continued on, that everybody was happy, that we'd find a way to work together. I don't know how the rest of the merger is going, but
I'm great.
Yeah. So I really appreciate the welcoming feeling and the collaboration that we had. It turns out that Rabbi Nanus had programmed many of the films I had programmed over the last 3 years for university for Wilshire Boulevard Temple. So we knew immediately we were in sync in terms of sensibility and what would work with people. And I look forward to more. I want to say that being involved with film is what drew me back into being an active participant at University Synagogue, where I found a way of scratching my Jewish itch and my movie itch and finding relevance in both and having both inform each other. And when I try and select films for us going forward, it will be films that are not necessarily 100% fun to watch, but that will nourish us, that will be certainly engaging. I don't program simple entertainment. I program entertainment that is meaningful and that gives us something to talk about. There are many, many films that are fun to watch and even have some Jewish relevance or Jewish values in them. But if they explain themselves so thoroughly, there's nothing left for us. What's the point of wasting our time together and wasting an evening discussing something that doesn't need to be discussed? So I try to find films with meat on their bones that will satisfy all of our different appetites, excuse the extended metaphor, and will give us something to engage with and get to know each other better. What the university people know is over the last 3 years, we've been quite a tight group, and we've really gotten to understand how each other thinks and feels about things a lot more than we would have without the film group. It's not that there was no other place to do that at university, but this was just one more thing that could tie us to and engage us with the synagogue life. So I hope that continues. You won't find us strange people. And I want to turn it over to the past president 2 times of University Synagogue, Fern Salka, who tonight will be our moderator, who will help sort of run all our voices together so they make sense and we don't step on each other. So Fern, please tell us how we're going to run tonight.
Okay. As Jim said, I used to be important and now I just call on people. So I'm really, really happy to see everybody. and get to know your names. It'll be a little hard for me because I don't know everybody's name yet, but I'll try and learn them. If everybody would please mute themselves when you're not speaking, that would be helpful. And we are on several screens, and I would ask you to raise your hand in the chat, but for some odd reason on this, I do not see
Raise hand.
the raise hand thing.
It's in participants for.
It's under participants. If you go
I
to,
know, but it's not there. It's weird.
it's under mine.
Might be in
Yeah, I see it
reactions.
on
You
mine.
have reactions.
Well, at the bottom of participants, you'll see a raised hand at the
Yeah.
very bottom,
And
next
it's
to the
there
yes or no.
Under
Lauren,
react,
I just raised my hand. Can you see it?
No.
I'm going to
Yes,
raise my
I can
hand.
see, I can see when people virtually hand, I can see that the hand is raised. I don't know why Fern and I can't see the option to do it, but when you do it, I can see that it's happening.
Okay. All right.
Vern,
So-
can you see it now? The blue hands or purple hands?
Does somebody have it? Yes, I can see the people who
Okay.
raised it. I can't see how to, where it gives the option, but I can see the hands. So you can raise your hand, you can put, and if you raise your hand in the under participants, that would be great. And I'll call on people, and what I'll try and do, I'll try and give everybody a chance to speak once, so I may not get back to you until somebody else has had a chance to speak. And I will kind of,
Fern?
Yeah.
excuse me. I also don't have it under participants, but I do have it under reactions.
okay,
You
So
can
there must
react
be
all
other-
you want, Risa.
But it's a raised hand under reactions
No,
if
it isn't.
if you don't have it under participants.
Okay, I don't actually have it under reactions either, but that's okay. I can see it. So what I'll do is I'll kind of do a running list of, and let you know I've seen you. So I'll say, we'll talk in the following order, and I'll list people as we go. So I'm really happy we're doing this. I'm happy we're getting together, and it's all yours, Jim.
Well, Fern, please explain to people how to use chat if they're not familiar, because they can raise questions in
Okay.
it.
So if you click at the bottom of your screen, if you click on chat, you can type in notes to everyone, and we'll all see it. And I will take a look at that. And Hannah, who's behind the screen that says W, will also take a look and see, make sure that we get as many people as possible.
Okay. So let's just start out. I'm going to put my email in the chat to everyone. So you can reach out to me and tell you what you like or didn't like about this. And let me know your movie suggestions and any other things you want to talk about. If you want to continue the discussion with me at any time, this is what I do. You're lucky I'm semi-retired because I have a lot of time. And let's start off. I just watched this film again this afternoon, and I had a slightly different perception of it. I didn't realize what a light, delicate touch it had. And I had thought there were other driving forces in it, but it's really this beautiful little study of two very different personalities and the baby steps they take towards getting to know each other and knowing themselves in the process and being then able to move on with their lives. So I'd like to take us back to the beginning of the film. It's always good to start at the beginning and say, what was your first impression of Clara and Aldo when you first saw them? Anybody want to take that on? That's my question. Real complicated. This is the scene when they first saw each other. We first saw Aldo delivering a baby in the hospital in that slow motion kind of surreal sequence. And then the first scene together is when Aunt Olga brings Clara to see him because she's moody, you know, and entering puberty. Does anybody want to
So
just
we're gonna start,
this,
yeah.
by the way, my approach to these discussions has always been, what are your feelings as a viewer? What do you think? And that's been the real gateway into each other's sensibilities and getting to know each other. And by revealing your reactions, you teach other people about the film and about yourself. So it's not like I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want you to put ideas in our heads.
So
So,
we have Susie and then Melanie.
okay,
Please
Susie,
unmute yourself when you're speaking. Susie, unmute. Good.
Okay. It began more quietly than any other movie I have ever seen. I wasn't sure whether I was going to like that, whether my sound was broken. I wasn't sure. I don't know if you remember how the nurse turned back in the hospital and you just saw her lips moving. It
Yeah.
was very, very clever.
tell
I
us your
too
thoughts
saw-
about the two main characters. That's really what we're headed for here.
Okay, I am. Here I come. Very much related to my opening statement. They were very quiet at the beginning, especially the doctor, exceedingly reserved. I can't help but make a comparison to how American doctors are. And so he was very quiet. She, on the other hand, wasn't so quiet. She was out there and her personality grew on me, totally grew on me. At first, I thought she was a brat. And at the beginning, the way she didn't talk. And then I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
My first impressions were she was a brat and he was a very, very shy, quiet man.
Okay. Certainly not wrong. Does anybody have something else they want to add to that?
Melanie, Roz, and then Jill.
Okay, so my husband and I, we watched the movie and at the beginning, I don't know, I was totally confused about that first scene. At first I thought maybe it's a flashback and maybe she's having the baby, but a little bit after that I started to understand it. My impression of Clara at the beginning was related to my working at a school because she just seemed like not a very mature middle school, young girl. Brash, flippant, just out of character. I didn't know what to make of her. She developed in such a poignant and beautiful person as we went into the movie. But at the beginning, she was outspoken. She was brash. She didn't mind what she said. I'll let my husband speak. What do you think about him and her?
My comments were about later in the movie. So
All right, so later. As far as the doctor, it took me a while to get into his character. I didn't relate to him till we got a little further into it, but I definitely related to Clara.
Okay. Did you think that might be intentional on the part of the writer and director?
Yeah, I did. and the ending for sure. There should be a sequel to the movie, but yeah, I'd like to see what happened then. But yeah, it was one thing I wanted to say for both movies is it's so nice to see movies we probably never would have seen. I never might have seen this movie.
Right. Well, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, but
yeah,
she developed into quite a woman.
Right. You'll never see an action movie or Transformers.
That's all right. I don't like them.
Or Marvel.
All right.
Who's
So
next?
Roz Weissman, then Jill, then Steve Miller.
Roz, unmute, please. Hit that red button. Lower left of your window, Roz, or
Roz, while you're trying to do that, I'm going to let Jill go.
Okay, so for me, this is the kind of film I love seeing. I love where it's told, it's a film. You watch the picture, the film starts out and a lot of the film is their action, their reaction, their memory. I love when you see the tattoo on the doctor's arm. When I see Clara, the girl, I just see the bags under her eyes and the pain she's gone through. When you see the doctor and how standoffish he is and how removed he is, he's going through the motions of life, but he's accepted the responsibility of this girl who's clearly a kid And I mean, obviously I had the fear like, oh God, please don't be a Lolita situation. And you really, you know, it's not going to go there because of who he is. And I thought,
But how do you know who he is? When you first see him, he could be anybody. He could be a stalker.
No, for me, the tattoo on his wrist.
Okay, but forgive me for taking good notes, maybe not so good. We don't see the tattoo for quite a while.
For me, just his detachment from emotion.
Okay. Why, when you saw that, before you saw the tattoo, why do you think he was detached?
Well, the lack of emotion, period, in every action of his life. For me, he's going through the motions of life. He's just like.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't know at that time that he lost his wife and 2 sons in the camps.
No, for me, well, he's a good actor and there's a great director for me, because I could feel his pain. I could see the child's bags in her eyes and this very home sad, like dirty hair and 2 little braids. And I will say, I knew she would grow to become a flower. I didn't expect her to stay that way. And also because you have these 2, for me, opposite characters. She's at the beginning of, you know, the blossom of your life, and he's crossed that, you know, he's like, what's next? And they have this, I won't say desperate bond, but kind of, she has nowhere else to go. And he's just going through the motions and says, hey, come stay with me. But for me as a film, I thought it was beautiful. It's beautiful cinematography. I felt.
Let's get back to him, Jill. And I'm so glad you're participating. It's the first time you've spoken up, and I'm glad the film brought it out of you.
Late tonight because I usually go to bed very early.
Okay. It's a Wednesday night. Okay. So, but here's my point, and I want to throw a term out now, which we all know, but in that blankness, what you're seeing is a different form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And these people are both badly injured. She was easier to spot. Now, Melanie thought she was just a bratty middle schooler, and she certainly came off, you know, she didn't have a good thing to say about anybody in the first 5 minutes you saw her. It was just this constant, you know, West LA brattiness. You wanted to smack her. But he showed, and we don't know this, but the point is it's consistent it was his consistent personality. In the end, he's not that much more demonstrative than he is in the beginning, but we know he's changed. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I wanted to give it a name. We don't have to refer to that at all. We'll just call it Damage from the Holocaust. And this is, you know, why I selected this movie. I may as well toss it out here now. I forgot to do it earlier. Since about 10 years ago, the committee that administers Auschwitz decided that they were doing something that was outdated with Holocaust education globally. Yes, there's still the March of the Living every year, and still German kids go there once a year, at least once in their high school careers to see it. And Israeli kids go there, and American Jews make pilgrimages to Auschwitz. But they said, we're not being as effective as we need to be. This was in like the 2005, 2010. And they said, we have to find new ways of never forgetting, of making the Holocaust relevant to current times. Now, I was in Berlin at the New German Art Museum, and we had an exhibit I was part of. And I interviewed high school students there. And some of them, in their broken English, told me, we're sick of the Holocaust by the time we get to the 12th grade because we've had a unit on it every year. It's not ours. We didn't do it. We didn't cause it. Of course, they don't think about their grandparents or great-grandparents, but that's okay. And the key is to find, how do you engage these people in the meaning of the Holocaust? We're tired of the eyeglasses and the bags and the rail cars. We've all seen it plenty. So how do you breathe new life into it? And what this film is probably one of the best examples of is post-Holocaust filmmaking, where the Holocaust is about the living and the survivors, and how do we carry on with it? And our connection to it now in 2021 is the young people who are very young at the time. Now, granted, this film is set in 1948 to 1951 or 54, at a very unique time in Hungarian history. But it's an example of how filmmakers have taken the idea and carried it forward and milked it forward. Well, what are the consequences of this? Maybe we, as sensitive people who care about the world in general, can get more from it now if we have this new perspective on it and can apply the lessons from it to today. That's the end of my lecture. But I think it's fascinating that even professional Holocaust educators harp on this. And I do want to call on one now, Jeffrey Ellison, who is a professional Holocaust educator. Jeff, would you mind chiming in for like a minute on this, lest we dwell on it too much?
Yeah, I think that within historians as well, there is a growing sense that the Holocaust did not end in 1945. It continued to live on in those who survived. And we now know, for example, that their DNA was actually changed in the camps, and they have passed on those changes to their children and then to their children's children.
Could you define what some of, Jeff, excuse me, could you define what some of that inherited trauma is?
You mean how it manifests itself?
Yeah, I mean, what are the human consequences? What do we see as well,
I can relay one story of Howard Reich, who lives here in Skokie, who was the music critic for the for the Chicago Tribune. And what he talked about is every night his mother in Skokie would sit by the window till like early in the morning. And he didn't realize how abnormal this was. But the reality was that she was afraid that the Nazis were still going to come for her and for the children. We know that second generation, the children of survivors have various disorders as a result of parents who were overprotective, that were intensely paranoid, hoarded food. So the children themselves were then, the trauma continued on, and it still continues on. One of my favorite questions to ask students is, when did the Holocaust end? And I would argue it's still going on. It's not just going on for individuals, but it's also going on collectively for the Jewish people. We are still traumatized today by the Holocaust. And I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thanks a lot. I would like to add that since the Holocaust, there have been genocides in Darfur, in Bosnia. By the way, if you want to see a decent Bosnian film about the massacre at Srebrenica, there's no massacre on camera, but it will inform you as to the trauma there. The genocides don't go away, and these offenses against humanity are still too much present with us. And that's why, these films have value, is because they show us a different way to not forget. So let's get back to the characters. Does anybody else want to talk about the difference in personalities?
We have some people who'd like to speak. I will say, as a child of two Holocaust survivors myself, I have something to say about it, but I'll say it a little bit later as we talk about it. Roz, you haven't been able to unmute, so I'm gonna take Steve Miller next, and then Rabbi Nanus, and then Roz will try you again if you want to.
I just wanted to comment that I don't think it's really accurate to say early on we don't know who they are, and later we find out who they are. I think that the people we see in the beginning are not the people we see later. It's almost like they're numb or dead. The child is really in denial. She won't admit her parents are gone. The thought of even visiting an orphanage terrifies her. Her great aunt really doesn't know how to deal with a teenager. I get the sense she didn't have children. And both she and the doctor, through this strange relationship, it's like they're born and become people who have a life and have hope. But I don't think that's who they are in the beginning. I don't think it's not that
Okay.
the person is hidden. The person really isn't there. The person hasn't been
Okay.
born, and they really need this. And it's a way for them to actually become human and move forward in the world.
Thank you for summing up the whole movie for us. But I want you to drill down into one of your comments, and that is she couldn't go to the orphanage. Could you take that apart for us a little more? Why couldn't she go?
She had a myth that her parents were alive, and even acknowledging that there were orphans, many of them probably lost their parents the same way, and she did not want to confront that reality. She wanted to believe her parents were out there, and I do think that through her relationship, she was able to move on and get over
Right.
that by the end.
So there's a river we call this, and it's denial, right?
Sure.
Because facing reality was too painful. Right now, there are other instances of orphans. Does anybody remember other orphans in the movie? Not the kids at the orphanage. This may have gone by us too fast because it happened in dialogue. The other doctor who comes to treat her for a fever finally invites them to his home. He and his wife are in their 60s easily, and they're two young girls with them. They're not their daughters. These are two orphans they adopted to raise on their own. Okay, so this was done at the time. There were a lot of people doing this. So what was Aldo doing with Clara? Even though no agency put them together, you know, what is the need the two have for each other? That's where I'm taking this. You know, the adoption of the two children by the doctor and his wife, it's not just for the children's sake, it's for their own sake, to recover their own children whom they lost.
Right.
So what do Clara and the doctor, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think Rabbi Nanus had something to say.
Yes, and then Risa,
Okay.
and then Steve Zimmerman.
Well, to me, when I saw the doctor immediately, I knew he was deeply depressed and deeply shut down. And also, you know, we know that after the Holocaust, most survivors never spoke about it. They didn't even, no one wanted to hear it. He was in Hungary, and how many Jews were there, and it was something, it was too horrifying to even talk about. So you carry all of this, like you said, PTSD, you carry it within, and it just crushes you. And it's like and yet he was doing a life-affirming thing. He was bringing life into the world, but he couldn't live himself. So I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition of this emotionless man bringing in life. And the girl, she was like she had, what do we call it? If you know, where you can't sit still. If she's
ADD?
Yeah, like ADD or something, but psychological ADD, because if she stood still, she would have to face it or think about it. So by moving, acting out, or whatever, it's a kind of a way of keeping everything at a distance. And so the two of them were coping in actually exact opposite ways.
Right.
Of what they had gone through.
Also known as shpilkas.
Yeah, wait, hold on, Judy. Rabbi Nanus, you hit on something that was really interesting. The survivors didn't want to talk about that. Can you share, I'm sure you've had plenty of experience with this, with how survivors who are bent that way deal with their children and grandchildren about their experiences?
Well, there are two ways. Some tell nothing and just manifest it in their behavior, and the children are made a little nuts because they don't really know what happened, but their parents have all this, as we said, overprotective, neurotic worry. I mean, I had a Holocaust survivor friend who lived on the 28th floor of a doorman building with guards, and the minute he came in the house, he put 2 chains on the door because they could break in. He never said a word. I just watched him do this, but you know, and then there are those who do tell their children and then put some of them are okay, but a lot of them, you know, they're managed to handle it, but then they have all the expectations of their own thwarted lives, or the children feel it, their obligation to fulfill what their parents were not able to do, to be successful, to give them grandchildren, to fulfill all the thwarted dreams of their parents. They feel this terrible burden as well. And then the third thing is a lot of times they're made to feel that anything you're going through is not as bad as what the parents went through, so it has no value. You weren't in Auschwitz, so that's not so bad. You broke up, you had a divorce, you're sad, you're depressed, whatever. It can't compare. And so then it's very confusing. So all of this is kind of that inherited trauma, or, you know, the second generation from what the parents went through.
You know,
Thank you.
there were many different defense mechanisms. I grew up in a group of immigrants. My parents' friends were all Holocaust survivors from Poland. And my parents and their friends all spoke about their experiences quite a bit.
That's
Not
unique.
to Americans, not to American Jews.
Oh, they didn't have friends who were American.
Exactly. They didn't even associate with them.
Right.
They couldn't understand. They were like a foreign
That's right.
group.
That's right. They spoke to each other, and that was the topic, and they spoke to us, but they didn't engage in it. Although they spoke about it, I remember my father speaking about his 11-year-old niece who I knew he loved, and she was killed in Auschwitz. And when he talked about it, I said, Dad, I know you loved her so much, but I never even saw you cry when you talk about her. How come? And he started to cry, which I had almost never seen in my life. And he said, when I talk about these things, it's like I'm up here and I'm looking down on the events of my life, and I'm telling you about it. I don't feel it. If I felt it, I would go crazy.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And
And
hence,
that's the doctor. That's how the doctor's being.
That's right.
He's not
Yeah.
feeling it,
That's right.
so he won't go crazy.
Mhm.
so next, Arisa, and then Steve Zimmerman, and then Jeff.
When we talk about the personality that we're seeing, the damaged personality of the doctor, remember that we also learn that there's some history there before the Holocaust that this man was in sexual relationships with some of his patients. And
What evidence is that, Risa?
it was spoken, we were told, it was in the dialogue that he had a reputation, and it was referred to later on that he had a reputation, and we know who you are. We know who you were, but it was clear that prior he was a kind of a I wouldn't say a predator, but was having inappropriate relationships with some of his patients. And then that has disappeared with the Holocaust. And the other comment about that is with the orphanage for the child. Where did the aunt find her? I had the feeling that she was found in an orphanage.
There is a passing line of dialogue where she says, I was looking for my nephew and other nephews, and I found her.
I found her. So she must have been in an orphanage
in somebody's care, yeah.
So those were the two things. And anyway, that's my comment about their personalities.
Thank you. Steve Zimmerman.
Okay. All right. With regard to how they are at the beginning of the movie, I mean, you don't see their emotion. It's because they're feeling the devastation every day of their lives of the past. Okay. I mean, yes, they're kind of cutting the feelings off, but they're clearly been devastated by their respective past. I think they kind of, obviously he becomes a father substitute or father figure for her. She becomes kind of a daughter to her, right? And like seeds that kind of germinate during the course of the movie, they have an ability for one another to permit them to access images and memories that can be fulfilling and meaningful and happy. It's like, okay, for the Aldo, being around her, you start to see all these flashbacks in the movie of actual scenes where he was happy with his family. And conversely for her, you see flashbacks of her family. It's like they gain some power from one another to access their, positive images from their past.
It's a great observation. Really good. Thank you for that. I think the Clara's dreams, when she's in the bathtub, she sees her younger sister. When she sees Aldo shaving, it reminds him of her father who put shaving cream on her nose. And then there's scenes with her mother. It's very poignant, but done with a light enough touch. I mean, not so subtle that it goes by without noticing, but it just keeps things on, keeps you grounded there in who they are.
Jeff, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'm just going to get to what I thought was the critical point in the movie.
No,
don't do that.
Don't do that.
Right, then I won't do that. I'll go back to something else that was said,
okay, good.
Which is that I think that, the displaced persons camps after the war had the highest birth rate of anywhere in the world. And what I see in the beginning of this film is an attempt to kind of emotionally and physically try to reconnect with people, and the struggle. She jumps into bed with him immediately just to have that kind of physical contact. Later, the woman he starts dating, when he touches her as a doctor, she kind of tenses up because she says, I haven't, been touched in so long. And there is this sense in which these characters are reaching out to each other to kind of reconstitute families, reconstitute lives, reconstitute themselves.
Right.
Many of them got married very quickly, and a lot of them had really terrible marriages because what they had in common was that they had these awful experiences, but they might not have married that person. You had a woman who was a doctor who married somebody who was selling bicycles. You had my parents were married before the war, so they had a long enduring relationship that was formed before, but many of their friends had just married as, to have a warm person, to have somebody who understood their experiences, and to have babies quickly as possible.
I think that's a very understandable kind of desperation. And it's important that we look at her getting into bed with him for the first time as an asexual attempt. It's just she's scared and she's alone. And this is a theme throughout the movie where when the first time she visits his apartment, and he puts tea in front of her, and then she embraces him, and then he very hesitantly puts his hand on her shoulder. It's like that embrace means so much to her. And if you look at each of those instances where they touch each other, it's asexual. It's not erotic. It's all about I'm here with you. Before they even know each other. It's the touch that she longs for so much. And he's not even good at it. If you notice his reactions when he touches her, there's a hesitancy, there's a gentlemanliness about it. There's I don't really want to go there. I don't even know how to do this because it's so strange to me. And I've never touched another woman since I lost my wife. So there's a sexual tension there, but it's not about sex. And I found this so interesting about the film, that every time they come near, it's charged. You think, is it going to go deeper? Like, how about the scene where she puts her head in his lap in the park? Oh my God. Does anybody want to react? What did you think when you first saw that? If there's nobody else on the first question, let's move to that. Nobody. Okay, that's a live one. The answer is, and he's stroking her hair.
Michael Chastis would like to speak.
Okay, Michael's the diplomat to talk about this one.
I was going to say, yeah, it's sort of a weird dynamic in that moment. Like I myself was like caught between that's kind of weird and also and not looks much more like lovers than like a parent-child thing. But then especially with a younger kid, you wouldn't think about it twice. And we know their relationship, and so I thought it's probably not like over the line. But then, of course, in the eyes of the school official walking past, of course,
Okay.
they get the worst reading.
But Michael, when that happened, did you see that their relationship was different from the beginning? Didn't you see?
Oh, sure. I mean, just the ease that the physical ease that they both have with each other at that point. He's not stilted. He's smiling. He's relaxed. It's a totally different sensation than when, like, the scene that you mentioned where she embraces him in the kitchen and he wasn't expecting it and doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. That scene, by the way, Michael, in the park happens halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
So that's pretty deep into it.
Yeah.
So what I find remarkable is how the movie took us there, not finding it too shocking.
Yeah.
It kept us, there was a tension there. Uh-oh, is this going to go somewhere I didn't think it would go?
Mm-hmm.
But it took us up to the point where we thought it might be possible.
Well, I trust you're going to get later to the scene further along in this arc.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the secret police come.
Yeah.
Okay, we
Nothing
have
like a little danger to ramp up the sex, right? Okay, Fern.
Marina, Steve Zimmerman, and Susie.
In my recollection, when Aldo was talking to the aunt and telling her that Clara was spending time in his apartment, he told her that his past sexual experiences, that it's no longer on the table for him. So I was surprised when in the end he did pair up with a woman. Maybe something was revived, but I wouldn't have been surprised if desire was killed in him together with a will of smiling.
Yeah, I think that's well observed. I think you're exactly right, that he didn't feel desire anymore. But there's something else very important that he said in that phone call. He said, my decency is still intact.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't expect him to be the predator, even when the girl tempted him. But I thought that her head on his knee didn't stir a man's feelings. It was a father's kind of embrace,
Yes.
Not a man and a woman interaction.
Yeah. When I saw it this afternoon, that's what I felt throughout, up until the climactic scene, which we'll get into later. There wasn't sexual tension. There was this need. What it's really about is the need they have for each other, and the role that he seems to take to so well, and she goes after it because she sees the soft spot. He's receptive, and she desperately needs a parent. So they kind of like feed off each other's needs, and I think in the beginning it's a bit mechanistic because they can't resist each other, but eventually it becomes full-blown need for who they are as people to each other. But that is a very important scene. And of course, what is the consequences of the park scene are what? Anybody want to take that on? She gets called into the principal's office.
Hold on for a moment, if I may. There are a few people. I'd like to give Aviva a chance. She hasn't spoken yet.
Yes.
And then we'll do Steve and Susie. Aviva, unmute yourself.
Lower left corner, Aviva.
Great.
I want to say, I think he looked for a friend because she suggested it.
And I mean, she was more forward than he was.
No, I mean, she tells him, you need a person.
Yeah.
And he promptly dials her, goes to the office, dials her,
I see. That's the new woman's.
the new
Yeah,
woman,
yeah.
because Clara has said to him, you know what, you need somebody.
Okay. I think this happens after the dance when he sees her with a young man and he realizes it's not going to go beyond this. So I better fulfill that need somewhere else. You know, I think it's it almost feels like Bye Bye Birdie, where the parents are repulsed at the young people's courtship. And he takes on this very, paternalistic, not with my daughter, you don't, who is this guy? There's a bit of jealousy and envy, and he's having a hard time seeing his charge becoming a different person with other people. So this is one of those subtle moves where both of them are moving forward with their lives and not being able to control it. He can't control his jealousy, right? Just like she can't control the fun she's having with Janus, if that's his name. And now she enjoys controlling him in the beginning.
Okay, Steve Zimmerman, and then Susie,
And then Jane.
and then Jane. Okay.
Yeah, my thought about the girl putting her head in his lap was kind of a clever ploy by the director. It was kind of similar to earlier in the movie where she climbed into bed with him. I think the director is pushing at that notion that every form of touch, especially in this context, is not necessarily erotic. And so she wanted to create that kind of tension or conflict. Jim, you asked what came of that event. And I think it's interesting, actually, that the authority figures in the movie, the people at the school who were concerned about it, actually came to accept that occurrence because someone reported it. Remember what happened at the park? Someone saw them.
The teacher.
And the authority figures, you think, well, okay, boy, there's kind of a Stalin overlay here and they're going to come down on these people. But in fact, what happened is they listened to their explanation, they thought about it, and they accepted it, which I think is very interesting sociologically because it's consistent with what was going on at that time in Hungary.
I didn't read that as acceptance. I felt skepticism, especially on the part of
there may have been some skepticism, but you expect people being carted off in the middle of the night,
Well,
it was nothing like that. They may have been a little skeptical, but they were also, okay, we'll buy that.
I beg to differ. The principal let it go. The math teacher wasn't going to, but she didn't have the power to press it further. But I'm glad we got to this, and here's why, is because there is this undercurrent of the new fascism invading Hungary. These people just escaped Nazism and the Holocaust. And suddenly their own government is taken over by this monster from the East in Russian communism. And you'll notice very early in the picture, in the film, he was alone in his apartment, and there was a headline in the newspaper about how to build the new socialism. So that's an early sign that the propaganda was beginning. This was 1948. I mean, I'm sure it began before, but Russia was, drawing the rope tighter and tighter in its control over Hungary. And in a way, this is the new oppressive environment that these survivors have to live through. And that will take us to the climactic scene. But Fern, who's next?
Yeah, so next, Susie, then Jane, then Susan Jonas.
I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
You are, but lean in so we can hear you better.
Okay. I wonder if anybody else was confused the first time she slept over. There was no discussion. The scene went right from, maybe that's when the doctor called the aunt or whatever, but she was in bed with him. And then they got up in the morning and he said she had to get off to school. At first I thought in my mind, well, he doesn't have a couch. Where else is she going to sleep? And then I thought, well, he could sleep on the floor. And then I thought, well, let's let this movie go on. But
Thank you.
But was it intentional of the director to have it so just get in bed and we'll just both
Well,
go to sleep like robots? It was confusing to me.
okay, you know, we've seen this before in other films where directors let us loose to imagine whatever, and they eventually clarify it later. You'll notice that I think the first time they're in bed, he rolls away. Well, before she gets into bed, he rolls away from her.
Right.
You know, she's asking him personal questions. And then she gets off the sofa and into his bed, and he realizes it. He gets out of bed and he takes a pillow from the sofa and puts it under her head, very paternally, and then gets back into bed and rolls away from her. So in a way, he's establishing his hands-off credentials with her. You know, it's but the direct.
Thank you for clarifying that. I didn't realize that either one of them were ever on the sofa. I thought they were both.
Well, it was what we call a two shot, a wide shot where he's in the foreground first and she's in the background, and then he rolls over to camera so his face is big, right? And then she approaches him and gets into bed. You see her feet on the carpet there, slowly treading by. I don't want to wake him. You know, she's not there to wake him. She's there because she wants to hug somebody again. And I think even before that, she said, can we hug again like it was in the kitchen? After the first hug, she said that. It's a girl who's desperate to be held and feel the presence of someone else in her life. And Aunt Olga will not do that for her.
Right.
But I think the director is very much playing with our suspicions and a certain sexual tension here, but he's taking great pains to say, this guy is not going to do anything, you know, because he knows. I mean, we don't really know how dead he is yet, but she's going to break through that deadness eventually, but he's still going to, his decency is intact. And that, I think, is the charm of the movie. And when I realized that, it's kind of what lightened it up for me. It's not a sexual thriller. The sexual tension isn't that high. And I don't mean to skew our discussion towards that, but it's like, these are two people who need other people, and they are who they are. And we're lucky they're such good people. And it's too bad they're so wounded, but they're going to continue to be the good people that they are through the end of the movie. So who's next, Fern?
Jane is next, and then Susan Jones, and then Melanie.
Jim, I'm going to take issue with what you just said. I found there was a great deal of sexual tension in this movie, but the difference is that it wasn't between the two of them. It was in our brain. I think the filmmaker is playing with our brains, because every moment you go, oh, please don't go there. Please don't go there. It's going to just upset me so much. And he doesn't, but there's so many instances. And for just as an underpinning of it, I mean, he had two boys. Think of a movie that could have been made where he befriends a little boy, and you know, where he's trying to reconnect with a male child. This is a girl, a prepubescent, you know, and a girl going through puberty whose hormones, by the way, are going berserk at that moment in her life. So and he is a gynecologist. He touches women for a living. So I felt the tension enormously. And then I realized, no, it's not going there, as you said, and that it's my tension that I'm feeling.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
This whole idea of her needing to be hugged and how he needed that, it's so relevant right now because we all need to be hugged. And maybe that's why my tension was up in the stratosphere. I mean, just missing that personal contact was.
Yeah. I think you're right. When I said the sexual tension, I meant in our brains, because the filmmaker was very much playing with us. And, you know, if anybody else wants to chime in and say, yeah, me too. But I did host another discussion of this film, and somebody took me to task about it. She said, oh, there's absolutely no sexual tension in it at all. And I dodged the question, and I had a long email exchange with her to sort of clarify why that was in play. So I'm not trying to justify my own theory, but I saw it this time, because I knew how it ended, as a much more father-daughter thing and a need thing, and a delicate dance between two personalities that could not come together unless they had been put together somehow and learned to, as I said in my write-up of the film, heal each other, because they were what each other needed. Not that they knew in advance, but they sensed it.
All right, Susan Jones, Melanie, and Michael Chaskas.
So I'm actually Mimi Soroka.
I'm Susan.
Susan's my
She's
mom.
my-
Hi, Mimi.
Hi. So I was going back to the question that was raised about the scene where they're in school and the teacher, they had just seen each other. Sorry, Jim, do you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. So they're in school and the teacher and the principal are very skeptical about this relationship. And for me, that it was a very painful scene, because here's this poor child who's gone through so much and isn't supported in school. Like, these people are in denial themselves, who weren't necessarily the victims of the Holocaust, but certainly stood by quietly as all these things happened, and maybe not quietly, whatever, but they were certainly complicit in society as this was happening. And she's damaged. Who knows if the other classmates have also been survivors, but it didn't seem like there was any care given or understanding about the situation. There was no discussion with Olgi and the doctor about how these are both taking care of her, and so it was just really, you talk about a need, and there's even like the societal folks and people who you think you'd go to, your teachers, other people, and they really were on their own. They didn't have people who understood.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's like we all know how staunch ideologues the early Russians were. And it's like your feelings didn't seem to matter because we were remaking a society. We weren't dealing with damaged people. A very interesting montage in the movie is when he interviewed various teachers of her, and you saw their different takes on her. And some of them understood her better than others, but they were all on the periphery. And it was really at arm's length. So you're right. She didn't get that from school as she might have in a progressive school today. But it was nice to see other faces in the film too. And to see, each of their takes on her were a little bit biased, oh, she's so high strung and she should learn to get a hold of that. Or, she's very bright, but she's weird. It was a bit of levity, but also, to a point. And it fleshed out that school situation for us. I liked it, maybe others didn't, but I thought it very effective for the 30 seconds it took to hear from the teachers.
Okay, I'm gonna let my husband speak. Michael.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Lean in, as Jill Sandberg would say.
Background. I didn't see it so much about the Holocaust, but the background of the Cold War that interested me the most. The like you just mentioned about people like spying on them, and these activities, like you say, on the ideological changes that are going on. I like history movies, and this one I liked the most because it gave you insight into the how should you say, like, transition to the Cold War and how that happens. And similarly, it's kind of going on now with the breakdown of politics. So, and then I thought the climax of Stalin dying gave a great deal of insight into how they felt about this transition from experiencing because we've seen so many movies on experiencing the Holocaust in so many forms. Very little is known about how people went through the beginnings of the Cold War, and that's something actually we went through as when we were kind of young adults.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly where we were headed. Not just the newspaper about building socialism or the comrade math teacher going to rat on her, but it's remember the other doctor, Dr. Pista, who cures her of her fever. comes back and said, I decided to join the party so I could earn more money for my family, but I want to warn you, you're one of the 3 people they told me to spy on. So again, these survivors are oppressed once again for things they didn't do, like for being Jewish during the Holocaust era, but here for being communists or being intellectuals, whatever it was. I mean, we don't know who was abducted that evening. But I'm so glad you brought that up. There is the specter of the Cold War over all of this movie. And that's how film artists and scholars and writers have taken the Holocaust many steps forward by showing how it lives on. Maybe you and I aren't traumatized by it because we didn't have direct contact with it through a relative, but it goes on in our culture and we see it again and reverberates.
Before I call on Michael, there's a number of people, myself included, in the chat who comment on a topic that's related, which is you talk about the fact that he's Jewish. I mean, you intuit it by a few things and by the experiences, but it seems to me to be pretty deliberate that Hungary is now a really neo-Nazi, has a very strong neo-Nazi presence. And I don't think it's a mistake that the makers of this film don't specifically say that these people are Jewish. And in fact, many of the countries that were very anti-Semitic wind up saying, we don't want to talk about the fact that they're Jewish. We suffered too. And they could have been anybody any family who was suffering, who was being hounded by the Nazis.
I think that's a really great observation. I didn't see it from that point of view that Barnabas Toth, who's actually a young director in his 30s, I failed to look up his filmography, but he probably was minding what he feared was the censors. It was made in Hungary. But in a way, this is what makes this a more timeless movie. These could be gypsies or homosexuals or even communists, and others who were persecuted, artists and criminally insane and handicapped people. It didn't matter. In a way, he kept it generic to keep it safe, but it also helps it live on and resonate more with us, whoever we are. So I don't think he was being coy by it, Fern. I think you're right. It was a conscious decision not to do it. I don't know if it's because he feared censorship or because he just felt, why just make it only for Jews, to be so damaged. We were all damaged from this.
Michael Chaskis.
Yeah, I was going to say, going back to Jane and Jim's point earlier, that the director is toying with us by presenting these situations where we're forced to wonder whether the relationship is going to go in a sexual direction, and we're, obviously rooting for it not to. I actually was more tense during the film. I had that going on, certainly, but even more than that, I felt like I was on an emotional knife's edge almost the entire time that I was watching the film, because the depths of their emotional needs were so stark. And as Jim referred to it, as a delicate dance of them sort of establishing this relationship with each other, was just terrified, not knowing that the movie would have a quote unquote happy ending, how it would work out and whether someone would misstep and the whole thing would fall apart, if Aldo would in fact get taken by the police and she would no longer have him. It was so fraught with those emotional, it was almost an emotional thriller in that way. That's kind of what I was feeling throughout. I was in kind of a state of high tension almost the whole time.
Okay, since it's 8:30 plus, let's get to that scene where they're sleeping together in the same bed and they hear the cars pull up outside. How did you react to that, Michael?
Oh, well, I mean, we're clearly set up to think, and I did, that the secret police were coming for him, presumably based on his doctor friend and the knowledge that the party had of him.
Yeah. He also pulls out his own suitcase, which has been packed in advance in case they come for me.
Yeah.
But go on with your own feelings about that.
Oh, well, then, of course, the scene goes into this other place that we've been dancing around the entire discussion, which I think coming into this discussion, I didn't even know how exactly to feel about it. But I think in light of everything else that's been said, I think I interpret it as just Clara really not having the life experience and of course being damaged, as you say, to be able to separate out strong feelings, that she knows that she's feeling, you know, romantic urges, but she doesn't quite really know what to do with them because emotionally she's placed all her eggs in Aldo's basket, essentially. So I look at it as severe confusion, really, rather than, you know, a Lolita moment, as it was referred to.
I don't know if it's severe confusion. I see it as severe need. Remember, she's a girl who's been in denial of her parents' death. You know, that she would have heard from them by 3 years after liberation. But what convinced me, and I was looking at the images very carefully. You hear the knocking on the door and the discussion, and you see the three shadows go by the window, leading a third person out. I think there might have been only two shadows before, and they embrace. And you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of embrace is this? And it's fear up front, and then the fear turns into something else. And if you watch her hands on his back and his hands on her back, it becomes something else in danger territory. And then we step back and we see a wider view of it, and her face is looking up to his as though she wants him to kiss her, right? And we know she's just, she's a victim here, a victim of the Holocaust, not a victim of Aldo at this point. And Aldo, whose decency is still intact, backs off. But both of them approach that point of what would be no return. But I want to emphasize this, the brilliance of this movie is that what drives them together in this way is the black boots at the door, taking somebody else away. They could be coming for one of us or for Aldo and shatter what we have together. This would be the most devastating thing, as bad as losing her parents again. So it's an expression of the ultimate terror and the ultimate need. And in a way, it finds its way into something touchy-feely, erotic, but it isn't. And I just think it's the filmmaker's triumph that he pulled that off. We were on knife's edge, and their better angels prevail. I mean, they can't do that, you know. But to have the coincidence of the new communist fascists invading Hungary and doing Nazi tactics among innocent citizens is just too scary for either of them to deal with. And they both like venture into strange territory, which they don't pursue. Anybody else want to react to that? That's a very powerful scene. If it wasn't for anybody else, tell me, because maybe Michael and I are crazy.
I just want to say something that I was very struck. The suitcase touched me hugely. And because it was so clear to me, as in my life and the movie captured it, how hard these people worked to have a normal life, but how they were damaged by their past, and moments happened that made it impossible that you could see the cracks in the life they were trying to construct. The fact that he had a suitcase waiting, you know, when my mother appeared to be pretty normal most of the time and lived pretty well, but when she was quite old, we had an earthquake in 1994 in Santa Monica, and it was very loud, and all the windows blew out, and it sounded like a bomb. And I went over to her house, and she was standing in front of her apartment building wearing her granny nightgown. It was 6 a.m. She was wearing her granny nightgown and a full-length mink coat. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I have been in this place before, and I'm not leaving without my coat this time." But you know, it was this close. Everybody tried so hard to live a normal life, and then things would happen, but there were these little things that showed of the cracks. And I think the film with the suitcase did that so beautifully. I think some people who haven't spoken, Natalie would like to speak first, and then Marina,
Arlene.
Marina, Jeff.
Okay, go ahead,
And
Fern.
Arlene, I'm sorry, Natalie, then Arlene, then Marina. and
Okay.
Jeff.
I like very much what you said, Fern. I've been waiting to sort of say something about similar to that. And my fault with the movie was, yes, at the end, we see that Aldo has a girlfriend and he'll probably marry her, we think, from the way the movies, they're making it happy at the end. And that Clara has decided to marry this boy. We know, I felt he was definitely not Jewish and had no experience as Clara had. And we see that scene where they're celebrating. And yes, that is what you do. You try to have a normal life. You want to go back into a life that everybody else is happy with. But these people will never be happy. And over and over and over again, just like what Fern said about her mother, those memories that we see or hear about, and we see that Clara sees the Germans take her little sister and tie her up on the wall or the tree to let her starve to death, a tree. Now, and that her parents are dead, and he can't look at the photographs of his beautiful wife and 2 children. So that we know, I know, everyone sitting here knows that all of these memories are going to come back and influence their life. So it's not going to be ever happy. But other people watching this film, people who are not Jews, who even Jews who do not associate, know about these terrible things, I think that was a mistake of the film. I would have loved to see just a little look between Clara and Aldo at the end, a look that said, we are never going to forget this, something like that. I would have felt better about it.
Natalie, do you really need the? Do you really need the look? You knew it without having seen it.
Well, I don't know if everybody watching that film would know it.
But you did. So, I mean,
I did. But I mean, who are not Jews, if you're making this
like,
film out for the public.
You can't make
Anyhow, other than that, it was very good.
Okay, good.
Arlene, you want to unmute yourself, please?
Yes.
Yeah, we're unmuted.
It's Arthur and I both want to say something.
Yes.
I thought that scene with the police outside was the most moving scene of the whole film. The way they clung to each other was not sexual. It was love. It was fear. It was holding on to somebody that they may never see again. And that was an incredible scene to me. Arthur, I don't know what you
Well,
want
the first time we saw the movie, I was very concerned as that scene unfolded that it was going to turn into something sexual. But having seen the entire film and watching it the second time, it made me realize that she was kissing his neck and embracing him because she feared she would lose him, that the secret police were going to come for him, and that it was not, in fact, it didn't have the sexual overtones that I had thought the first time.
Okay, but to take that a step deeper, Arthur.
Yes.
So by making you suspect it might become sexual, How did that affect the ultimate feeling that you did have? Was it relief? Was it, it amped up the desperation? Didn't it gave way to a bigger feeling, didn't it?
Well, in part it was relief because that first time of watching the film, throughout the film, there was this undercurrent of sexual tension. And so I think I probably was anxious that it not go to that place. And it was, at first it was simply relief that it didn't go there. And it took the second viewing for me to understand a little more deeply what might have been happening. And,
what I meant to suggest was
yes.
that your relief allowed you to soar higher with what the scene meant about their relationship, how much they meant to each other. This is how a director manipulates emotion and tension. It's a total fake, but it puts you in a different place so you could go somewhere else.
And then we had the last scene in the film, which I thought was like a TV comedy. It was so silly, so light. It was intended to show us that their life was going on and they each were making their choices and yada, yada, except I felt it was so trivial to be in the movie because I was so affected by the tone of the film.
Well, what I got from that last scene, despite the apparent lightness in many respects, was that these two people who really were connected so tightly emotionally were not going to have each other in the same relationship in the future. And in a way that was as sad as it was wonderful for them each, that each was moving on. It was a bittersweet moment, and I think each of them recognized it in their meeting at the bathroom, and they did convey that. I thought quite well. It was almost a tragedy as well as a happy ending.
Jim, I know that we have about 4 people who wanted to speak, but I know we're also coming to a close.
Okay, let's let the 4 people speak. They've heard me talk enough, but I did want to chime in on Arthur, what you said. Yes. We'll come back to that. Oh, so who's next, Vern?
All right, so we're the last 4 speakers in order will be Jeff, Marina, Risa, and Jane.
I don't know if anybody noticed it, but in that scene, when they're together, that climactic scene, that there's this shadowy thing on the wall, and that kind of it was almost like lace-like on the wall, and it reminded me of when they were looking through the book of Aldo's life. Yeah. There were these sheets of paper between them that had that same kind of look to them, and it gave me a sense of fogginess, that the people are kind of living and they're dead at the same time. They're alive, but they're not alive. And it reminds me of Elie Wiesel's last line in Night, where he looks at himself in the mirror and he sees a corpse looking at him. And the very major line in the book, in the movie, is the idea of who got off easier. Was it those who perished in the Holocaust or those who remained? And because the ones that remained were struggling to hold those two kind of characters in themselves simultaneously, the living and the dead.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think she does say that it's much harder for us. We who remain, you know, or she says, well, I didn't remain. I was left, I was abandoned. But it's, you know, it's very similar things.
I think that's an interesting thing. And I can tell you that my mother, like many Holocaust survivors, would not agree with that. I mean, she looked life straight in the eye and she would have said it is better to be alive than to be dead. So, you know, I just take exception with that theory. So we have Jeff, Marina, Risa.
We did Jeff already.
We did Jeff. I'm sorry. Marina, Jane, and Risa.
Hi, and thank you for letting me speak a second time. The suitcase meant probably a lot more to me because I grew up in the Soviet Union. I was born a year and a half after Stalin died, but my grandparents told me about the suitcases that they had ready. They were actually saved from arrest by his death. And the warm clothes that your friend mother put on, they had taken to friends because if they are sent to Siberia, then the friends may send the warm clothes behind after them. At the period that's reflected in the movie 1948 through 53, there is a great book about Shostakovich, a famous Soviet composer. He was condemned in official propaganda, especially at that time, 47, 48. And Shostakovich spent months sitting the nights on fully closed on a suitcase, just waiting for them to knock on his door. So I think this episode with this suitcase is more related to the Stalinist era than to Holocaust because they were not prepared for what happened to them.
Thank you.
And not allowed a suitcase.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Jane and then Risa.
Yeah, I want to reiterate something I think Arthur said. The ending, I don't think is meant to be a happy ending at all. And like, as Fern had said earlier, so many of these damaged survivors went into marriages that were, you know, maybe they were hopeful about it, but they didn't really, they weren't their brasherts, you know, this was not a meaningful relationship. And it's clear from the movie that the meaningful relationship was really Aldo and what's her name?
Yeah.
And there, you don't see that spark between her and her boyfriend or him and his girlfriend. You know, theirs is the central relationship. And so it's very sad. And by then she's a woman, she's an adult, so it wouldn't be creepy anymore. But they had their moment and they passed it. It didn't happen. And so it's, I found it very—
Well, I think this is, go ahead.
Jim, you're freezing up. Go ahead.
Well, you know, Jane, what you're putting your finger on is that one of the things the Holocaust took from survivors was this kind of fulfillment. They had to settle, and maybe it wasn't bad. Maybe it was so much better than anything they might have thought they could get. But the real good stuff is in this twosome is just not attainable. And so many hopes were dashed, not just among the dead, but the living.
Right. Last word from the audience, Risa.
This is a funny last word, but the last scene was not the party. The last scene was Clara on the bus, smiling to herself, looking out the window, happy with what she had, not with the boy. Also, from what I had said before, and then I put the justifications into the chat, I carried with me from 12 or 13 minutes into the movie, the fact that he saw himself now as a decent man. And that was a big change for him. And I knew from the beginning that he was not going to get into a sexual relationship with her. And that eased all the sexual tension for me. And then she announces that she's not ready to have sex at that point. And the fact about the boy, I don't know if he was Jewish or not Jewish, but that was the boy that danced with her at the dance. So they obviously had continued a relationship. This was not just boom, out there.
No.
So I found that very meaningful. And I definitely felt, as someone else has said also, that the look between them at the end of the party, there was no question in my mind that they were going to continue in a close relationship for the rest of their lives. No, they weren't going anywhere. They were staying right where they were in Hungary. And I loved the entire experience of the movie. I was just kind of sorry when it ended, because I could have gone on with, God willing, they had the successful kind of lives at the end that many Holocaust families, like Fern's family, had when they made it here. And they made it, and they made it in Hungary too, families. So I felt very good about the ending.
Good.
Jim,
All right,
you're closing.
It's 9 o'clock and time to say goodnight. I want to again thank Rabbi Nanus for expediting this, and we look forward to more. I am so glad that all the
Jim, for a wonderful discussion.
I love doing it, and that's why I do it, and it's because we don't get this anywhere else. You know, even pre-pandemic, we didn't. And films like this are why I went into filmmaking as a career. That's why I'm such a rich man now. But this is what it's all about, you know. And this film just affects most people this way, and that's the kind of film I hope to bring to all of you in the weeks forward. Please let me hear from you. My email is at the top of the chat. I'd love to hear your comments on tonight, what would make it run better, what you liked or didn't like about the movie, any suggestions you have. I'm always open to you, and I'm always thinking of the audience, our audience here, when I make my decisions about what to screen. I want to thank Fern and Hannah for helping out and expediting it. This is typical of what we did at university. And, you know, I was going to start out tonight saying, how many people here are members of Wilshire Boulevard Temple?
All of us.
That's right. That's the correct answer. And I was going to chastise the old university people, saying, no, we're all Wilshire Boulevard Temple now.
And we're better together.
I hope tonight.
Better together.
Better together. Absolutely. Now, I've decided to program a movie called Indignation. It's a lesser novel, based on a lesser novel by your favorite Jewish author to hate, Philip Roth. And it's probably the best movie made of any of his books. And it's about a Jewish young man in New Jersey who, during the Korean War, who decides to go to a WASPy college instead of enlist in the army to fight in Korea. And he meets a kind of unstable, emotionally unstable, very sensitive young woman, and learns about the benefits and the costs of having a real relationship for the first time. But you don't have to read up on Roth at all, but it's a very good film. And it's probably the best film made about his novels, because he came true to himself in the novel. And the other, you know, he's kind of like being the author instead of the person. But we can talk about that later. You don't have to read up on Roth.
Jim, what's
that
the
will
date
be
of that? Well, he's frozen, so I'll say it. It's May 22nd.
That would be the 22nd.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
thank
you
you.
can
Am I
unmute
still frozen?
yourselves as you go out if you want
No,
to
I'm
say
as
bye,
co-
everybody.
Well, thank you all for participating.
Thank
Please come
you.
back. Thank you all. We'll see you on the 22nd.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Jim.
See you
Thank
next
you
time.
very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great movie.
Great discussion. Good night.
Nice to meet new people.
Yeah, it is great.
Hi, Fern.
Hey.
Bye, Byron.